The fluorescent lights of the Quick Stop gas station on Route 29 in Culpeper, Virginia, buzzed with their usual tired hum. It was 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in mid-March, and Marcus Deshawn Williams stood behind the counter, watching rain streak down the windows like tears on glass. He was 34 years old, with broad shoulders that seemed too big for the faded red uniform polo, and hands that were calloused from years of work that had nothing to do with ringing up lottery tickets and energy drinks. There was a weariness in his brown eyes, the kind that came not from lack of sleep, but from carrying weight that no amount of rest could lift. The store was empty except for the smell of old coffee burning on the warmer and the faint country music crackling from the ancient radio his manager Dale Hutchins insisted on keeping tuned to 95.3 FM. Marcus didn't mind the quiet. Quiet meant he could think about Jalen, his 7-year-old son, who was asleep right now at Mrs. Patterson's house 3 blocks away, probably clutching that worn stuffed elephant he refused to let go of. The bell above the door chimed. Marcus looked up, and what he saw made something in his chest tighten. A woman stumbled in from the rain, soaked completely through, her dark hair plastered to her face, mascara running in black rivers down her cheeks. She was maybe 30, dressed in clothes that looked expensive even when drenched, a cream-colored blouse now transparent and clinging, tailored slacks, heels that clicked unevenly on the linoleum as if she'd broken one. But it wasn't her clothes that made Marcus step out from behind the counter. It was the way she was shaking, not from the cold, from something deeper, something broken. She made it 3 steps inside before her legs gave out. She grabbed the nearest shelf, a rack of potato chips, and sent bags scattering across the floor as she sank to her knees. And then she started to sob, not quiet crying, not dignified tears, the kind of sobbing that came from the bottom of a person's soul, ugly and raw and absolutely devastating. Marcus had heard crying like that only once before in his life, from his own throat, in a hospital hallway in Richmond when a doctor told him that Denise, his wife of 6 years, hadn't survived the surgery. He moved without thinking. "Ma'am?" He crouched down beside her, keeping his voice soft, the way he did when Jalen woke up from nightmares. "Ma'am, are you hurt? Do you need me to call someone?" She looked up at him, and her eyes, green he noticed, the color of spring leaves, were so full of pain that Marcus felt it in his own chest like a physical blow. "My son," she whispered. "I just came from the hospital. My little boy, he's only 5. They said—" She couldn't finish. Another wave of sobs overtook her. Marcus didn't ask permission. He didn't think about store policy or security cameras or what Dale would say. He simply put his hand on her shoulder, gently, carefully, and said, "Okay, okay. You're gonna be okay. Let's get you somewhere warm." He helped her to her feet and guided her to the small back room where employees took breaks. It wasn't much, a folding table, 2 plastic chairs, a microwave that hadn't worked since 2019, but it was private and dry. He grabbed the cleanest towel he could find from the supply closet and handed it to her. Then he made her a cup of coffee from the break room's personal stash, the good stuff Dale kept hidden, and sat across from her, saying nothing, just being present. "For 15 minutes, she cried. For 15 minutes, Marcus simply stayed. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. "They found a tumor in his brain. They said it's aggressive. They don't know if—" She pressed the towel to her face. "I'm sorry. I don't know why I'm telling you this. I don't even know your name." "Marcus," he said quietly, "and you don't got to apologize for anything." She looked at him then, really looked, as if she was seeing him for the first time. "I'm Victoria. Victoria Chen." "Victoria." He nodded. "That's a strong name. You got a strong name for what you're going through." It was a simple thing to say, maybe even foolish. But something in her expression shifted, just slightly, like a single ray of light breaking through storm clouds. The bell over the front door chimed again. Marcus stood quickly. "Stay here. I'll be right back." He walked out to find Dale Hutchins standing in the middle of the store, rain dripping from his John Deere cap, his face already twisted into that familiar expression of irritation. "You got a customer's car sitting at pump 3 with the door hanging open," Dale said. "And what the hell happened to my chip display?" "There was a woman. She needed help." "She need to buy something?" Dale cut him off. "Because I didn't see any transaction on the register in the last 20 minutes. You know what I saw? Nothing. You know what that means? You weren't doing your job. Dale, she was in crisis. Her kid is sick. She just needed—" "I don't care if her kid is the Pope." Dale stepped closer, and Marcus could smell the beer on his breath. "This ain't a charity. This ain't a counseling center. This is a gas station, and you are paid, barely, to sell gas and snacks, not to play therapist to every hysterical woman who wanders in." Marcus felt his hands curl into fists at his sides. "She's a human being, and you're fired." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. "Get your stuff," Dale continued, a cruel smile tugging at his lips. "Leave your uniform shirt. I'll mail you your last check. Maybe." Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Something cold settled into his stomach, the reality of what this meant. Rent was due in 9 days. Jalen needed new shoes. Mrs. Patterson could only watch him for so long before she'd need payment. But when Marcus walked back to the break room to get his jacket, and he saw Victoria Chen sitting there still, trembling, still holding that coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to the earth, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. "I have to go," he told her gently. "But there's a motel 2 miles up the road, the Pine Grove. Clean, safe. You shouldn't be driving tonight." She looked at him with those broken green eyes. "Thank you, Marcus." He nodded once, pulled on his jacket, and walked out into the rain. He didn't know that this was the last night he would ever be poor. He didn't know that by morning, everything would change. Before the story continues, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you love stories about unexpected kindness and second chances, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. What do you think Victoria will do when she learns Marcus lost his job because of her? The next morning arrived gray and heavy, the kind of Virginia dawn that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain again or simply sulk. Marcus sat at the small kitchen table in his apartment on Cedar Street, a 2-bedroom unit above a laundromat that always smelled faintly of fabric softener and someone else's cigarettes. Jalen was eating cereal across from him, slurping milk from his spoon with the unbothered joy of a 7-year-old who didn't yet understand words like unemployment or eviction. "Daddy, how come you're not wearing your red shirt?" Jalen asked, a drop of milk escaping down his chin. Marcus reached across and wiped it with his thumb. "Day off, buddy." "Can we go to the park then? The one with the big slide?" "Maybe later. Daddy's got to figure some things out first." Jalen nodded, satisfied with that answer in the way only children could be, and returned his full attention to the cartoon marshmallows floating in his bowl. Marcus stared at the stack of bills on the counter. Electric, water, the insurance payment for the old Honda Civic that had 187,000 miles and a transmission that groaned every time he shifted into third. He did the math in his head for the 100th time. Even with his last paycheck, if Dale actually sent it, he'd be short by at least $400. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. Probably a scam. He almost ignored it, but something made him answer. "Mr. Williams?" A woman's voice, professional and crisp. "Please hold for Ms. Chen." Before Marcus could respond, there was a click, and then a different voice came through, one he recognized immediately, though it sounded steadier now, more composed. "Marcus, it's Victoria, from last night." He sat up straighter as if she could see him. "Victoria, hey, how are you holding up? How's your boy?" There was a pause. When she spoke again, her voice was thick with something he couldn't quite name. "He's stable, for now. They're running more tests." Another pause. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." "Okay." "Did you lose your job last night? Because of me?" Marcus closed his eyes. He thought about lying. It would be easy. She had enough on her plate. A sick child, a weight no parent should ever have to carry. She didn't need his problems, too. But something about the way she'd looked at him in that break room, like he was the first real thing she'd seen in a long time, made him incapable of dishonesty. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "But that ain't on you. That's on my manager being a—" He glanced at Jalen. "Being a not nice person." Silence on the other end. Then, "Where do you live?" "I'm sorry?" "Your address, Marcus. Where do you live?" He hesitated, but gave it to her. 742 Cedar Street, apartment 2B, above the Suds and Spin laundromat. "Stay there," she said. "I'm coming to you." The line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone for a long moment, unsure what had just happened. He looked at Jalen, who was now trying to balance his spoon on his nose. "Buddy, we might have a visitor coming." 45 minutes later, Marcus heard it. Engines. Multiple engines. The deep, expensive purr of vehicles that cost more than everything he'd ever owned combined. He went to the window and felt his stomach drop. 3 black SUVs, Mercedes, all of them, with tinted windows so dark they looked like they'd been cut from the night sky, were pulling up to the curb in front of the laundromat. They moved in formation, precise and deliberate, like a presidential motorcade had taken a wrong turn into the working-class side of Culpeper. Mrs. Delgado from the apartment next door was already on her stoop, hand pressed to her chest, probably convinced the FBI had finally come for her nephew, who sold herbal remedies out of his trunk. The doors of the middle SUV opened and Victoria Chen stepped out. She looked different in the daylight. The mascara streaks were gone, her dark hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail, her clothes immaculate. A charcoal cashmere coat, tailored black pants, boots that probably cost more than Marcus's rent. But it was her posture that struck him most. Last night she had been broken, barely able to stand. Today she moved like a woman who owned the ground beneath her feet. Because, Marcus would later learn, she often did. 2 men in dark suits flanked her, security clearly, but she waved them back as she approached the entrance to his building. Marcus met her at the door before she could knock. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The fluorescent hallway light buzzed overhead, and somewhere in the building, a baby was crying, and the smell of the laundromat drifted up through the floorboards, but none of it seemed to matter. "You didn't have to come here," Marcus said softly. "Yes," Victoria replied, her green eyes finding his. "I did." She glanced past him into the apartment. Her gaze landed on Jalen, who had abandoned his cereal and was now peering around his father's leg with wide, curious eyes. "Hello there," Victoria said, and something in her voice shifted, softened, as if the sight of a child had unlocked a different version of her. "What's your name?" "Jalen Marcus Williams," he announced proudly. "I'm 7 3/4. Who are you? Are those your cars? They're really shiny." Victoria smiled, the first real smile Marcus had seen from her. It transformed her entire face, made her look younger, less burdened. "They are shiny, aren't they? I'm Victoria. I'm a friend of your dad's." "Daddy doesn't have friends," Jalen said matter-of-factly. "He just has me and Mrs. Patterson and the man at the hardware store who gives him free coffee sometimes." Marcus felt heat rise to his cheeks. "Jalen—" But Victoria laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised and genuine, and it seemed to catch even her off guard. "Well," she said, crouching down to Jalen's level, "maybe I can be his second friend. Would that be okay with you?" Jalen studied her with the intense scrutiny only children possessed. Then he nodded solemnly. "You have nice eyes. They're like the gems in my dinosaur book." "Thank you, Jalen. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." She straightened and looked at Marcus again. The warmth from the exchange with Jalen was still there, but underneath it he could see the steel, the determination of a woman who had not come here to make small talk. "Marcus, I need to tell you something," she said, "and then I need to ask you something. Can we sit down?" He stepped aside and let her in. The apartment had never felt smaller than it did in that moment. The water-stained ceiling, the second-hand furniture, the crayon drawings Jalen had taped to the refrigerator. Marcus saw Victoria's eyes move across all of it, taking it in, and he braced himself for the judgment that usually came when people with money saw how people without it lived. But her expression held no judgment, only a kind of recognition, as if she understood something about these walls that he hadn't expected her to. "Jalen, buddy," Marcus said, "why don't you go play in your room for a bit? The grown-ups need to talk." "About boring stuff?" "Probably." Jalen sighed dramatically but complied, grabbing his stuffed elephant, Mr. Stompy, and trudging down the short hallway. Victoria sat on the edge of the worn couch. Marcus took the chair across from her. "My name is Victoria Chen," she began. "I'm the CEO and majority shareholder of Evergreen Dynamics. We're a biotech company. Medical devices, pharmaceutical research, hospital partnerships." She paused. "Last year, our revenue was $2.3 billion. Marcus felt like the floor had shifted beneath him. "I'm not telling you this to impress you," she continued quickly. "I'm telling you because I need you to understand something. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I have homes in 4 countries. I have people who do whatever I ask, whenever I ask it." Her voice cracked just slightly. "And none of it could save my son when I needed it most. None of it could give me what you gave me last night." "I just made you some coffee," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "No." Victoria shook her head firmly. "You saw me. Not Victoria Chen, the CEO, not the billionaire. Just a terrified mother falling apart in a gas station. And you treated me like I mattered, like my pain mattered." Her eyes glistened. "Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Marcus didn't know what to say, so he said nothing. Victoria took a breath, composing herself. "You lost your job because you showed me kindness. I can't undo that, but I can make it right." She reached into her coat and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you." Marcus took it slowly, opened it. Inside was a check for $250,000. The numbers blurred in front of him. He had to read it 3 times before his brain would accept what his eyes were seeing. "Victoria, I can't." "You can," she said firmly. "And you will. Consider it a thank you. Consider it an apology. Consider it whatever you need to consider it. But that money is yours, Marcus. No strings. No expectations." She stood, smoothing her coat. "But," she added, pausing at the door, "I do have one request. Not a condition, a request." "What's that?" She turned back to face him, and in her green eyes he saw something he hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, hope, fear. "My son, Ethan, he's at UVA Children's Hospital. He's going to need surgery, experimental, dangerous. And I'm going to need someone to remind me that I can get through it." She swallowed hard. "Someone who knows what it's like to sit in a hospital and lose everything. Would you come see me? Talk to me? Just be there?" Marcus looked at the check in his hands, then at the hallway where his son was playing, then at this woman, this impossible, broken, powerful woman who was asking him for something money couldn't buy. "Yeah," he said quietly, "I can do that." Victoria nodded once, and when she walked out the door, Marcus could have sworn the gray morning looked just a little bit brighter. 3 days later, Marcus found himself sitting in the family waiting room on the 4th floor of UVA Children's Hospital in Charlottesville. The walls were painted a soft yellow, someone's idea of cheerful, but the fluorescent lights drained any warmth from the color, leaving it pale and sickly. The room smelled of hand sanitizer and stale vending machine coffee and something else underneath, something Marcus remembered too well. Fear. Hospitals always smelled like fear. Victoria sat beside him on a vinyl couch that squeaked every time either of them shifted. She had been there for 6 hours already, waiting for updates on Ethan's pre-surgical scans. Her cashmere coat was gone, replaced by a simple gray sweater. Her hair was loose, slightly tangled, as if she'd been running her hands through it. She looked smaller somehow, more human. Jalen was at Mrs. Patterson's house. Marcus had paid her 3 months in. advance with some of the money Victoria had given him, money he still couldn't quite believe was real, and for the first time in years he had nowhere else to be. So he stayed. They had been sitting in comfortable silence for nearly an hour when Victoria spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "How did you know?" Marcus turned to look at her. "Know what?" "Last night on the phone." She kept her eyes fixed on the window, where evening was settling over the parking lot like a bruise. "You said you knew what it was like to sit in a hospital and lose everything. How did you know?" The question landed in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. For a moment, he considered deflecting, changing the subject, protecting himself the way he'd learned to do in the 4 years since his world had collapsed. But Victoria had trusted him with her worst moment. She had fallen apart in front of a stranger in a gas station and let him see her at her most broken. The least he could do was offer her the same. "Her name was Denise," Marcus began, and the words felt like opening a door he'd kept locked for a long time. "Denise Marie Williams. We met in high school, Jefferson High, right here in Virginia. She sat behind me in AP Chemistry, and she used to throw little pieces of eraser at the back of my head whenever she thought I wasn't paying attention." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "She was always paying attention." Victoria turned to look at him now, her green eyes soft in the dim light. "We got married when we were 23, Marcus continued. "Small ceremony. Her mama's backyard in Fredericksburg, June 14th, 2014. It rained that morning, and everyone said it was bad luck. But Denise," his voice caught. "Denise said rain on your wedding day meant God was washing away all the bad stuff so only good things could grow." He paused, gathering himself. Jalen came 2 years later, August 8th, 2016, at 3:47 in the morning, 7 pounds, 6 ounces. He had Denise's eyes, still does, these big brown eyes that looked at you like you were the most interesting thing in the whole world. Marcus leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "We were happy, really happy, the kind of happy you don't even know you are until it's gone. I was working construction then, making decent money. We just put a down payment on a little house over in Orange County. Nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a backyard with a tire swing. Denise wanted a garden. She'd already picked out the tomato plants." The memory hit him like a physical blow. Denise standing in the nursery aisle at Home Depot, holding up 2 different seed packets, asking him which one he thought would grow better. He couldn't remember which one he'd chosen. He couldn't remember what he'd said. He would give anything to remember. "It was a Tuesday," Marcus said, his voice dropping lower. "March 3rd, 2020. Jalen was 3.5. Denise had been getting headaches for a few weeks, bad ones, the kind that made her lie down in a dark room. She kept saying it was stress, that she just needed more sleep. But that morning, she couldn't get out of bed. She couldn't see straight. She was slurring her words." Victoria's hand moved across the vinyl couch and found his. She didn't say anything. She just held on. "I drove her to the hospital, MCV in Richmond. I remember the smell of the car that morning. She'd spilled coffee the day before and hadn't cleaned it up yet. I remember thinking I should have cleaned it for her. I remember thinking about a lot of things I should have done." Marcus stared at his hands. Rough hands, working hands, hands that had held his wife as she seized in the passenger seat. "They found an aneurysm. Brain. It had ruptured by the time we got there. They took her into surgery at 2:15 in the afternoon. I sat in a waiting room just like this one." He looked around, taking in the yellow walls, the flickering lights, the out-of-date magazines. "And I prayed. I prayed harder than I've ever prayed in my life. I made deals with God. I promised things. I begged." His voice broke. "She died at 6:48 p.m. They said she never woke up. They said she didn't feel any pain." The tears came then, silent and unstoppable, sliding down his cheeks. He didn't wipe them away. "After that, everything just fell apart. I couldn't work, couldn't think, couldn't get out of bed most days." "Lost the house? We'd only made 3 payments. Moved into that apartment above the laundromat because it was all I could afford. Took the job at the gas station because they didn't ask questions, and they paid cash under the table when I needed it." He finally looked at Victoria, and what he saw in her eyes wasn't pity. It was recognition, understanding, the look of someone who knew exactly what it felt like to have the world ripped out from under you. Jalen is the only reason I'm still here, Marcus said quietly. Some mornings, getting up for him was the only thing that got me out of bed. He needed breakfast. He needed school. He needed his daddy to keep going, even when his daddy didn't want to. So I did. 1 day at a time. 1 hour at a time. Sometimes 1 minute at a time. Victoria's grip on his hand tightened. I'm telling you this, Marcus said, meeting her eyes, because I need you to know something. Whatever happens with Ethan, whatever the doctors say, whatever comes next, you're going to survive it. I know it doesn't feel like that right now. I know it feels like if you lose him, you'll lose yourself. But you won't. Because you're stronger than you think, and because you're not alone. Victoria's composure finally cracked. A sob escaped her throat, raw and broken, and she leaned into him, her face pressed against his shoulder, her tears soaking through his shirt. Marcus wrapped his arms around her and held on. Outside, the sun finished setting, painting the hospital windows in shades of orange and gold. Inside, 2 broken people sat together in the wreckage of their grief, finding something neither of them had expected, a reason to hope. The weeks that followed moved slowly, measured not in days but in small moments of connection. Ethan's surgery was scheduled for April 15th, a date that hung over everything like a storm cloud on the horizon. In the meantime, Victoria spent her days at the hospital, watching her son sleep, reading him stories when he was awake, pretending to be strong when every cell in her body wanted to crumble. And Marcus kept coming back. At first, it was just visits to the hospital, sitting with Victoria in the waiting room while Ethan underwent tests, bringing her coffee from the cafe downstairs because she always forgot to eat. But slowly, gradually, the boundaries between their lives began to blur. You don't have to keep doing this, Victoria said one evening, 3 weeks after they'd first met. They were sitting in the hospital courtyard, watching the last light of day fade behind the Blue Ridge Mountains. I know you have your own life, your own son. Marcus shrugged, his broad shoulders moving beneath his worn denim jacket. Jalen's with Mrs. Patterson. He likes her better than me anyway. She lets him have ice cream before dinner. Victoria almost smiled. Almost. Still, you've been here almost every day. You must have things to do. I do have things to do, Marcus said simply. This is one of them. She looked at him then, really looked, the way she had that first night in the gas station, as if she was trying to understand something that didn't quite make sense. Why? She asked softly. Why do you care so much about what happens to us? Marcus was quiet for a long moment. A cardinal landed on a nearby bench, its red feathers bright against the gray stone, and he watched it until it flew away. Because someone should, he finally said. Because you shouldn't have to carry this alone. Because... He stopped, shook his head. I don't know how to explain it. When I saw you that night falling apart in that gas station, something in me just recognized you. Like I'd been waiting to meet someone who understood. Does that make any sense? Victoria's eyes glistened in the fading light. It makes perfect sense. After that, things changed. Victoria started inviting Marcus to visit Ethan directly, not just to sit in waiting rooms, but to actually meet her son. The first time Marcus walked into that hospital room, he wasn't sure what to expect. What he found was a small boy with his mother's green eyes and a smile that could light up a room, even from a hospital bed. Are you my mom's friend? Ethan asked, his voice thin but curious. She talks about you a lot. Marcus glanced at Victoria, who suddenly became very interested in adjusting Ethan's blankets. Yeah, buddy, Marcus said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. I'm her friend. My name's Marcus. Do you like dinosaurs? Ethan asked as if this was the most important question in the world. I love dinosaurs. T-Rex is my favorite. Ethan's face scrunched up. T-Rex is okay, but velociraptors are way cooler. They hunted in packs. That means they were smart. You know what? You're absolutely right. I stand corrected. Ethan grinned, a real grin, full of life despite everything, and something in Marcus's chest shifted. It felt like a door opening. It felt like coming home. After that, Marcus started bringing Jalen to the hospital. The first meeting between the two boys was cautious, circling, the way children often are with each other. But within 20 minutes, they had discovered a shared obsession with dinosaurs and were arguing passionately about whether a Spinosaurus could beat a megalodon in a fight. They couldn't even fight, Jalen insisted, his 7-year-old logic impeccable. One lives on land and one lives in water. But what if the Spinosaurus went swimming? Ethan countered. They could swim, you know. Scientists found out. Victoria and Marcus watched from the doorway, something warm and fragile blooming between them. He hasn't smiled like that in weeks, Victoria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus didn't say anything. He just reached over and took her hand. As March turned to April, a rhythm developed. Marcus would drop Jalen at school, then drive the hour to Charlottesville to spend mornings with Victoria. They'd have lunch in the hospital cafeteria, terrible food, but neither of them cared, and talk about everything and nothing, her childhood in San Francisco. His years playing football at Jefferson High before a knee injury ended his dreams of a scholarship. The books they loved, the music they listened to, the small, stupid things that made up a life. Victoria learned that Marcus could fix almost anything with his hands, a skill from his construction days. And one afternoon, when the TV in Ethan's room stopped working, she watched him take it apart and put it back together in under 30 minutes. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, genuinely amazed. Marcus shrugged, wiping his hands on his jeans. "My daddy taught me. He said a man should know how to build things and how to fix things. Said it was the only way to make sure you never had to depend on anyone else." He sounds like a wise man. He was. Marcus's voice softened. "Passed when I was 19. Heart attack. But yeah, he was wise." Victoria reached out and touched his arm, a gentle gesture that said more than words could. One evening, after Jalen and Ethan had fallen asleep in Ethan's hospital bed, curled up together like puppies, a nature documentary playing softly on the repaired TV, Victoria and Marcus stood at the window, looking out at the lights of Charlottesville twinkling in the darkness. "I haven't felt like this in a long time," Victoria said quietly, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "Like what?" She turned to face him, and in her green eyes he saw something that made his heart stutter. "Like I'm not alone," she whispered. "Like maybe things could be okay again." Marcus looked at her, this brilliant, broken, beautiful woman who had crashed into his life like a comet, and felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. He was falling in love with her. The realization hit him like a wave, sudden and overwhelming. He wasn't supposed to feel this way. He was a gas station worker, a single father living above a laundromat, a man with nothing to offer someone like Victoria Chen. She was a billionaire, a CEO, a woman who could have anyone in the world. But standing there in the dim light of a hospital room with 2 sleeping boys and the soft hum of medical equipment as their soundtrack, none of that seemed to matter. What mattered was the way she looked at him like he was worth something. What mattered was the way he looked at her and saw not a billionaire, but a mother, a woman, a person who had been hurt and was still standing. What mattered was this. Marcus didn't say any of that. He couldn't, not yet. Instead, he just smiled, a small, quiet smile, and said, "Yeah, maybe they could." And for the first time since Denise, he let himself believe it. April 14th arrived gray and heavy, the sky pressing down on Charlottesville like a weight. Tomorrow was the surgery. Tomorrow, doctors would open Ethan's skull and try to remove a tumor that had wrapped itself around his brainstem like a vine choking a tree. Marcus arrived at the hospital at 8 a.m., carrying 2 coffees and a bag of pastries from the cafe on the corner. The one Victoria said reminded her of a bakery she'd loved in San Francisco. He was rehearsing what he wanted to say to her, the words he'd been holding back for weeks, when he stepped off the elevator onto the 4th floor and stopped dead. A man was standing outside Ethan's room. He was tall, taller than Marcus, with the kind of lean athletic build that came from personal trainers and expensive gym memberships. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his navy suit immaculate, his watch catching the fluorescent light in a way that screamed money. He stood with his hands in his pockets, staring through the window into Ethan's room with an expression Marcus couldn't read. Victoria was inside, sitting beside Ethan's bed, but she wasn't looking at her son. She was looking at the man in the hallway, and her face, her beautiful, expressive face, was a storm of emotions Marcus had never seen before. Anger, pain, something that looked almost like longing. The man turned as Marcus approached, and his eyes, gray, cold, assessing, swept over Marcus in a single dismissive glance. He took in the worn jacket, the scuffed work boots, the paper coffee cups from a cheap cafe. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his voice polished and condescending. Before Marcus could respond, Victoria emerged from the room. Her eyes found Marcus immediately, and something flickered across her face. Relief? Guilt? He couldn't tell. "Marcus," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "This is David. David Hartley, Ethan's father." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Ethan's father. Of course. Of course there was a father. Victoria had mentioned him once, briefly, in passing. They'd been divorced for 3 years, she'd said, and he'd been largely absent. Marcus had assumed that meant gone, out of the picture, not standing in a hospital hallway looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine, looking at Victoria like she still belonged to him. "David arrived this morning," Victoria continued, and Marcus could hear the tension beneath her words. "He wanted to be here for the surgery." "Wanted to be here for my son," David corrected, his tone sharp. "Which I have every right to be. I'm still his father, Victoria, despite your best efforts to pretend otherwise." Victoria's jaw tightened. "This isn't the time or place, David." "Then when is? You've been avoiding my calls for months. I had to find out about the surgery from my lawyer." David's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from a passing nurse. "My son has a brain tumor, and you didn't even tell me." "I told you when we had a diagnosis. I told you when surgery became an option. You were in Monaco. You said you'd try to make it. And I'm here now." The air between them crackled with years of history Marcus couldn't begin to understand. He felt suddenly, painfully out of place, like a trespasser who had wandered into someone else's story. "I should go," Marcus said quietly, taking a step back. Victoria's head snapped toward him. "Marcus, no!" "Let him go, Victoria." David's voice was smooth, almost amused. "I'm sure he has things to attend to." The dismissal was clear, intentional. Marcus felt it land exactly where David had aimed it, in the soft, vulnerable part of him that had always known he didn't belong in Victoria's world. "It's fine," Marcus said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "You should be with your family. This is a family thing." He set the coffee and pastries on a nearby chair. Victoria's eyes followed the movement, and he saw something shatter in her expression. "Marcus, please!" But he was already walking away. The drive back to Culpeper took an hour and 45 minutes. Marcus didn't remember most of it. He drove on autopilot, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tight his knuckles ached, his mind replaying the scene in the hospital over and over. David Hartley, Ethan's father. Tall, rich, polished, everything Marcus wasn't. And the way Victoria had looked at him, not with love, Marcus was almost sure of that, but with something. History. Pain. The kind of complicated emotion that only came from sharing a life with someone, even if that life had ended badly. Who was Marcus to compete with that? He was a widower, a single father, a man who had been fired from a gas station job because he'd shown basic human kindness. He had nothing to offer Victoria Chen except himself, and standing next to David, Hartley himself had felt very, very small. His phone buzzed. Victoria's name on the screen. He didn't answer. It buzzed again. And again. A text came through. Please let me explain. It's not what you think. Then another. David showing up doesn't change anything. Please call me back. And another an hour later. Marcus, please, I need you. Ethan's surgery is tomorrow. I can't do this alone. Marcus stared at that last message for a long time. His thumb hovered over the keyboard, wanting to type something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. What could he say? That he loved her, that the thought of her with another man, even an ex-husband, made him feel like he was drowning, that he was terrified of wanting something this much because the last time he'd wanted something this much, he'd lost it. In the end, he didn't say anything. He put down the phone, picked up Jalen from Mrs. Patterson's house, and spent the evening pretending everything was fine. He made dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets for dinner. He read 3 chapters of a book about a magic tree house. He tucked his son into bed and kissed his forehead and told him he loved him. And then he sat alone in his dark apartment, listening to the rumble of the laundromat below, and wondered if he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. The knock came at 11:47 p.m. Marcus had fallen asleep on the couch, still in his clothes, the TV playing some late-night infomercial about kitchen gadgets. He jerked awake at the sound, his heart hammering, his first thought, as always, going to Jalen. But Jalen was safe in his room. The knock came again, more urgent this time. Marcus crossed to the door and opened it. Victoria stood in the hallway. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was tangled, her eyes red-rimmed, her cashmere coat replaced by a simple hoodie that looked like it might have come from a hospital gift shop. Rain dripped from her hair onto the worn carpet. When had it started raining? And she was shaking, though whether from cold or emotion, Marcus couldn't tell. Victoria, what? No. Her voice was raw, broken, but underneath it was steel. You don't get to talk first. I drove an hour and 45 minutes in the middle of the night, and you're going to listen to me. Marcus stepped back, stunned into silence. Victoria walked past him into the apartment. She stood in the middle of his small living room, surrounded by Jalen's toys and secondhand furniture, and all the evidence of a life so different from hers. And when she turned to face him, there were tears streaming down her cheeks. David means nothing to me, she said, her voice trembling. Nothing. We were married for 4 years, and for 3 of those years, he was sleeping with his assistant. He missed Ethan's birth because he was at a conference in Dubai. He missed Ethan's first steps because he was too busy closing a deal. He signed the divorce papers without even asking for custody because he said, her voice cracked, he said children were inconvenient for his lifestyle. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. He showed up today because his lawyer told him it would look bad if his son had brain surgery and he wasn't there. It's about optics, Marcus. It's about his image. It has nothing to do with actually caring about Ethan and everything to do with making sure the newspapers don't write about what a terrible father he is. She took a shaky breath. And you saw him standing there in his expensive suit, and you assumed. You assumed that because he's rich and polished and looks like he belongs in my world, that I would want him, that I would choose him. Her green eyes blazed. Do you have any idea how much that hurt? Victoria, I'm not finished. She stepped closer, close enough that he could smell the rain on her skin, the faint trace of hospital antiseptic, the exhaustion and fear and something else underneath. Do you know what I was doing when David showed up this morning? I was telling Ethan about you. I was telling my son that there was this man, this incredible, kind, gentle man who had come into our lives and made everything feel less scary. I was telling him that no matter what happened in that surgery, he wasn't alone. We weren't alone, because we had you. Marcus's throat tightened. And then David walked in, and you walked out, and I spent the entire day sitting next to my son's bed, trying not to fall apart, because the one person I needed, the one person who makes me feel like I can survive this, wasn't there. Her voice broke completely. My son is having brain surgery in 6 hours, Marcus. 6 hours. And instead of being at that hospital, I'm standing in your apartment in the middle of the night, in the rain, because I couldn't. She pressed her hand to her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. I couldn't let another minute pass without telling you the truth. What truth? Marcus whispered. Victoria looked at him, really looked, and in her eyes he saw everything she'd been holding back, every wall she'd built, every fear she'd buried, all of it crumbling. I love you, she said, and the words hung in the air like a held breath. I love you, Marcus Deshawn Williams, not because you were kind to me in a gas station, not because you sat with me in hospital waiting rooms, not because you make my son laugh, or because you fixed a broken TV, or because you brought me coffee when I forgot to eat. She stepped closer still, close enough to touch. I love you because when I'm with you, I feel like myself again, the real me, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just Victoria, just a woman who was drowning until someone reached out and pulled her to shore. Marcus felt tears sliding down his own cheeks. He hadn't even realized he'd started crying. You asked me once why I cared so much, Victoria continued, her voice barely above a whisper. Why I kept coming back to you. Why I gave you that money, with no strings attached. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers trembling against his cheek. It's because from the moment you crouched down beside me on that gas station floor and looked at me like I mattered, like my pain mattered, I knew you were different. I knew you were special. I knew that if I let you walk out of my life, I would regret it forever. Victoria, Marcus's voice was hoarse, thick with emotion. So I'm asking you, she said, her green eyes searching his. Please, don't walk away from me. Don't let David or money or fear or whatever voice in your head is telling you you're not enough. Don't let any of it win, because you are enough, Marcus. You are more than enough. You are everything. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain against the windows and the distant rumble of the laundromat below. Then Marcus moved. He pulled her into his arms, gently, carefully, the way he did everything, and held her against his chest. She melted into him, her arms wrapping around his back, her face pressed into the curve of his neck. He could feel her tears soaking through his shirt, could feel her body shaking with sobs of relief. I'm sorry, he murmured into her hair. I'm so sorry. I got scared. I saw him standing there and I thought you deserved better than me. I thought you deserved someone who could give you the world. Victoria pulled back just enough to look at him. You do give me the world, she whispered. Don't you understand? You give me kindness. You give me presence. You give me someone who shows up every single day, not because they have to, but because they want to. She touched his face again. That's worth more than all the money I'll ever have. Marcus looked at her, this impossible, beautiful, brave woman standing in his tiny apartment in the middle of the night, and felt something unlock in his chest, a door he'd kept bolted shut for 4 years, ever since Denise. I love you too, he said, and the words felt like coming home. I've been in love with you for weeks, maybe since that first night. I was just too scared to say it. Victoria smiled through her tears, the most beautiful smile he'd ever seen. Say it again, she whispered. I love you, Victoria Chen. And then he kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, questioning, as if both of them were afraid it might break. But then Victoria's hand slid to the back of his neck, pulling him closer, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of all the words they'd never said, all the pain they'd carried alone, all the hope they'd been afraid to feel. When they finally pulled apart, both of them breathless, Marcus pressed his forehead against hers. I'm coming with you, he said firmly. To the hospital. Right now. I'll call Mrs. Patterson. She'll take Jalen for the night. Victoria shook her head. You don't have to. Yes, I do. He cupped her face in his hands. Because you're my family now. You and Ethan. And family shows up. Fresh tears spilled down Victoria's cheeks, but these were different. These were tears of hope. Together, they walked out into the rain. The surgery lasted 7 hours and 43 minutes. Marcus and Victoria sat together in the waiting room, the same yellow-walled room where he had first told her about Denise. Their hands intertwined, their shoulders touching, their hearts beating in terrified synchrony. Nurses came and went. The sun rose, painting the windows gold. The coffee in their cups went cold and was replaced and went cold again. David Hartley had left sometime during the night. A text to Victoria's phone, brief and businesslike. Called away on urgent business. Keep me updated. She had shown it to Marcus without comment, and he had squeezed her hand a little tighter. At 1:23 p.m., Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, a small woman with kind eyes and steady hands who had been operating on children's brains for 22 years, walked into the waiting room. Victoria stood so fast she nearly fell. Marcus caught her elbow, steadied her. The surgery was successful, Dr. Rhodes said, and Victoria made a sound that was half sob, half laugh, her knees buckling with relief. We were able to remove the entire tumor. The margins are clean. We'll need to monitor him closely, but she smiled. Your son is going to be okay. Victoria collapsed into Marcus's arms, weeping openly, her whole body shaking with the release of weeks of fear. He held her tight, his own eyes blurring with tears, and whispered into her hair, I told you you'd survive this. 3 days later, Ethan was awake and alert and demanding dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets. Marcus brought Jalen to visit, and the two boys picked up exactly where they'd left off, arguing about prehistoric marine life and building elaborate Lego structures on Ethan's hospital bed. Watching them, Victoria leaned into Marcus's side. They're going to be trouble together, she murmured. The best kind of trouble, Marcus agreed. That evening, after Jalen had fallen asleep in the visitor's chair, Marcus found himself alone with Ethan for the first time since the surgery. Victoria had stepped out to take a call from her assistant, something about a board meeting she'd missed, and the room was quiet except for the soft beeping of monitors. Marcus? Ethan's voice was small, still weak from the ordeal. Yeah, buddy? Are you going to be my mom's boyfriend now? Marcus felt his heart skip. He looked at the 5-year-old, those green eyes so like his mother's, that curious expression that demanded honesty, and found he couldn't lie. I hope so, he said. Would that be okay with you? Ethan considered this with the gravity only children could muster. My dad doesn't make her smile, he finally said. You make her smile, and you know a lot about dinosaurs. He nodded, as if this settled everything. I think it's okay. Marcus felt something warm bloom in his chest. Thanks, Ethan. That means a lot. Also, Ethan added, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, Jalen says you make really good pancakes. I like pancakes. Marcus laughed, a real laugh, full and genuine. Then I'll make you pancakes as soon as you're out of here. Deal? Deal. 2 weeks later, on a warm evening in early May, Marcus got an unexpected visitor. He was sitting on the steps outside his apartment building, watching Jalen chase fireflies in the small patch of grass beside the parking lot, when a silver Porsche pulled up to the curb. The door opened, and David Hartley stepped out. Marcus tensed, rising to his feet. David held up his hands. I'm not here to cause trouble. Then why are you here? David was quiet for a moment, watching Jalen dart after the flickering lights. When he spoke, his voice was different than before, softer, almost uncertain. I came to say thank you, he said, and to apologize. Marcus waited. I was a terrible father. David's jaw tightened. I know that. I told myself it was because I was busy, because my work was important, because Ethan would understand when he was older. But the truth is, he let out a breath. The truth is I was scared of being responsible for someone else, scared of failing. So I just didn't show up. He turned to face Marcus directly. Victoria told me what you did, how you stayed with her during the surgery, how you've been there for Ethan. His gray eyes, which had seemed so cold before, now held something that looked almost like respect. You're a better man than I am, a better father than I ever was. I'm not trying to replace you, Marcus said carefully. I know. David nodded. but you're what they need, what they deserve. He extended his hand. Take care of them, both of them. Marcus looked at the outstretched hand for a long moment. Then he took it. I will. David nodded once, got back in his Porsche, and drove away. 3 days after that, Marcus took Victoria back to Culpeper, not to his apartment, to the Quick Stop gas station on Route 29. It was late evening, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, and the store was quiet. Just a bored teenager behind the counter who barely glanced up when they walked in. Marcus led Victoria to the back, to the small break room where he had first made her coffee, where she had first told him about Ethan, where everything had begun. Marcus, what are we doing here? Victoria asked, confusion and amusement mixing in her voice. He turned to face her. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. This is where I met you, he said. This is where I saw someone in pain and decided to help, even though it cost me everything. This is where my life changed. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. And this is where I want to ask you something. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Marcus lowered himself to one knee on the worn linoleum floor, surrounded by shelves of energy drinks and the faint smell of old coffee, and opened the box to reveal a simple diamond ring, purchased with his own money, not hers, because that mattered to him. Victoria Chen, he said, his voice steady despite the tears gathering in his eyes. I don't have much. I've got an apartment above a laundromat and a 7-year-old who thinks dinosaurs are better than anything and a heart that's been broken before. But everything I have, everything I am, is yours, if you'll have me. Victoria was crying, beautiful, happy tears streaming down her face. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes. Marcus slid the ring onto her finger, rose to his feet, and kissed her, right there in the break room of a gas station, under flickering fluorescent lights, in the exact spot where a broken woman had once fallen to her knees and found a man kind enough to help her back up. The teenager behind the counter looked up briefly, shrugged, and went back to his phone. Some things didn't need an audience to be perfect. 1 year later, on a perfect June afternoon, Marcus Deshawn Williams married Victoria Chen in her mother's backyard in Fredericksburg, Virginia. It was Victoria's idea to have the wedding there, the same backyard where Marcus had married Denise all those years ago. When he'd protested, worried it might feel wrong, she had taken his hands and looked at him with those green eyes he loved so much. That's where you learned what love looks like, she had said softly. I want to build our future in the place where your heart first opened. I want to honor what came before, not erase it. He had cried then. He wasn't ashamed of it. The ceremony was small, 50 guests on white folding chairs, a simple wooden arch draped with wildflowers, the June sun warm on their faces. Mrs. Patterson sat in the front row, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Dr. Rhodes had flown in from Charlottesville. Even David Hartley was there, seated quietly in the back, a genuine smile on his face as he watched his ex-wife find the happiness he'd never been able to give her. Jalen and Ethan stood at the altar as co-ring bearers, both of them in matching navy suits that they'd picked out themselves. Ethan's hair had grown back fully now, thick and dark like his mother's, and the scar from his surgery was hidden beneath it, a secret reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. When Victoria walked down the aisle, Marcus forgot how to breathe. She wore a simple white dress, no train, no veil, nothing extravagant, and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that matched the arch. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, and she was smiling, and Marcus thought he had never seen anything more beautiful in his entire life. The officiant spoke about love, about second chances, about the courage it takes to open your heart after it's been broken. But Marcus barely heard any of it. He was too busy looking at Victoria, at the woman who had stumbled into his life on the worst night of hers and somehow made everything make sense again. When it came time for the vows, Marcus took a deep breath. Victoria, he began, his voice thick with emotion. A year ago, I was a man who had given up. I went through the motions. I worked. I took care of my son. I survived. But I wasn't really living. I was just waiting. For what? I didn't know. Maybe for permission to feel something again. He squeezed her hands. And then you walked into a gas station in the middle of the night, soaking wet, completely broken, and you changed everything. Not because you needed saving, you're the strongest person I've ever met, but because you let me help you. You let me see you. You reminded me that kindness isn't weakness, that love isn't something to fear, that family isn't just the people you're born to. His voice cracked. Sometimes it's the people you choose. Victoria was crying. Half the guests were crying. Even Jalen was sniffling, though he'd later insist it was allergies. I promise to choose you, Marcus continued. Every day, in every storm, through every fear, I promise to show up because that's what family does. Victoria's vows were simpler, but no less powerful. You gave me coffee when I was cold, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me a family when I thought I'd forgotten what that word meant. She smiled through her tears. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know how grateful I am. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Marcus kissed her like it was the first time and the last time and every time in between. Jalen and Ethan cheered. The guests applauded. Somewhere in the crowd, Mrs. Patterson was openly sobbing. Later that evening, after the cake had been cut and the dances had been danced and the guests had begun to drift home, Marcus found himself standing at the edge of the yard, looking up at the stars. Victoria appeared beside him, slipping her hand into his. What are you thinking about? She asked softly. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. I'm thinking about a gas station, he said. About a rainy night and a broken woman and a cup of coffee that changed my life. He turned to look at her, his wife, his partner, his future. I'm thinking about how sometimes the worst moments lead us exactly where we're supposed to be. Victoria leaned her head against his shoulder. Behind them, through the kitchen window, they could see Jalen and Ethan at the table, laughing about something, their heads bent together like brothers, like family. Daddy, Jalen's voice rang out. Ethan says Spinosaurus could definitely beat a megalodon. Tell him he's wrong. Marcus laughed. Victoria laughed. And somewhere he was sure Denise was laughing too, because this messy, beautiful, unexpected life was exactly what she would have wanted for him. From ashes, dawn always comes. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe so you don't miss stories like this, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Have you ever experienced a moment of kindness that changed your life, or found family in an unexpected place? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for sharing this journey with us.